On paper, ULTRAKILL and Bulletstorm are strikingly similar. Both games are first-person shooters with a score that explicitly encourages you to perform the most elaborate functions within its gameplay, as opposed to merely the options that will overcome the challenge. Both feature a wide variety of weapons, often with secondary effects that can be combined with other weapons, but none of this is required to finish the game or beat a level. They came out almost 10 years apart, although ULTRAKILL is still technically in development, but spiritually they sit at the same camp. They both even have a wave-based horde mode that acts as a secondary supplement to the main game. In practice, however, these games are very different, and I'd make the argument that Bulletstorm has aged particularly poorly, its good ideas trapped inside of the jam jar that is 2010's first-person shooter design. ULTRAKILL allows the player to exist in many states at once. You can be shooting, parrying, and moving all at the same time, and the enemies mainly use projectiles as opposed to hit scan options, or have long tells if they do, allowing the player to room to apply all of their many options at the same time. Weapon switching is effectively instant, so while the game doesn't immediately entice the player to combine options, once they discover the multiple applications, they can apply them when and where they see fit. Bulletstorm, on the other hand, is more restricted. Not only in the amount of states that the player can occupy at once and how many weapons they can wield at the same time, not necessarily reducing the amount of combinations that you can have, but the amount that are accessible, but it's also structurally restricted. Enemies often use hit scan weapons, and the player's regenerating health gives them some agency on if they will recover health, but doesn't provide the player the room to outplay the AI on life or death situations. It creates a kind of mismatch between the type of play the character and presentation encourages and the environment and enemy design that restricts the limits of that intended play. ULTRAKILL encourages fast aggressive play in every aspect, while Bulletstorm is mired with the contemporary vision of console shooters, creating a game that wants to be hyper aggressive, but instead ends up being a less cautious version of the games around it. There's a lot more to discuss about these two games, and perhaps around ULTRAKILL's release I'd like to dive into it, Vanquish, Lost Planet, Bulletstorm, and pick apart the wider subgenre of the character action shooter. But for now I want to focus specifically on one part of these two games that stands out to me: the score. Of all the differences between the two, I find the score to be the most impactful, a little odd considering how minor a role it plays in both games. In ULTRAKILL, the impact is merely score at the end. If this affects anything like health gained from enemies, it's so minor that I couldn't tell. Depending on the amount of points that you scored, you can get a range from D to S, alongside both time and enemies killed. Weapons can go stale, reducing the score gained, with the score potential decaying over time as a connected sequence, encouraging you to switch up how you clear a room. If everything comes together as an S and you end up finishing the level without dying, you get a P rank. Completing all of the levels with a P rank allows you to access secret levels, however excluding that is merely a vanity goal. Points can also act as a currency to unlock new weapon variations, however it's so minor that you could go the entire game without noticing it. And considering ULTRAKILL can be completed with just a punch that does 1 damage, none of these variations are required or even really encouraged by the game. Bulletstorm, however, does provide the score a purpose. It acts as a currency that allows you to buy ammo and upgrades for the weapons. The game doesn't provide a goal on how high you should be scoring, but by restricting aspects of the kit to score, you are actively incentivized to maximize each enemy and view them as both obstacle and objective. Score can be affected by multipliers if multiple enemies are taken out with the same action, and you're rewarded extra for finding new methods of takedown, but collectively, each type of kill is disconnected from one another. You will be rewarded the exact same if you kick an enemy into some spikes to kill them instantly, even if you do it 10 times in a row. Excluding that, however, the game does nothing further to incorporate the score. There's no rank at the end, and while you do have a compendium of ways that you can score, it's not considered into how you play. Bulletstorm focuses on the minute interaction of each specific enemy. If you're given the opportunity to score a range from 200, 150 points, and given 3 enemies, there is nothing to incentivize you away from using the 200 point method every time. In ULTRAKILL, those 3 enemies and a similar score setup would encourage you to consider them as a connected group, even if they're taken out individually. By making kill types stale, the player is incentivized to slowly move away from the same method of execution as it yields a lower amount of points over time. The player can still use the same method, but it's not optimal. So even if the player uses a method that's particularly effective, there's a feedback that will have them consider alternative options. The important part here is that the score encourages a shift in what it means to perform an action. You don't just want to clear the objective, you want to do it while satisfying the positive feedback loop. One of ULTRAKILL's greatest qualities is that feedback loop changes, allowing the player a reason to shift the way that they play, even if it might not be the most effective for clearing the task. Bulletstorm's doesn't. It remains static over time, and so while the player's score might rise, the entertainment value in the score goes stale when the game doesn't present new opportunities to the player. This issue propagates further when it comes to weapon switch times and weapon limits. The player is occasionally given the option to have systems interlock with one another, but practically is given a layer of friction that makes the combination cumbersome. Restriction of systems is important. The constraints on the player, and the player finding out how to overcome those constraints, are what makes problem solving in games rewarding. But here the restriction is so persistent as to push the player away from making choices that might make the value of the feedback loop more rewarding. The score in Bulletstorm requires a large amount of time invested to maximize, which diminishes your ability to overcome the practical problem in front of you. ULTRAKILL, on the other hand, has a lot of its effective points of play become the largest contributors to the feedback loop. However, it's also true that the most effective points of play require a large amount of precision and understanding of the systems. A supercharged bomb does clear a room very effectively, but requires you to charge, switch, track, and shoot a single target with precision. This makes the macro of scoring in ULTRAKILL, achieving a rank, and the micro of scoring, performing the most effective action on an enemy, intertwined, but the kill staling lets that micro ebb and flow over the course of a level. Understanding of how to establish points contributes to the macro, and the macro of the rank encourages you to maximize the variety in the micro. It's not particularly complicated, and in fact you can see the exact same thing in other games, but it's a symbiosis that ultimately makes a minor vanity system actively contribute to the fun of the game. Bulletstorm, on the other hand, has its scoring system emphasize how limited the play really is, or at least it does when so many other games have done it better. When you're maximizing the score, you're often repeating the same action over and over unless a better option is provided by the game, rather than your own intuition. If you end up scoring so much as to not have it contribute to buying the next set of upgrades, you feel as though you've wasted your time, and in making sure that you can afford the next set of upgrades, you're encouraged to maximize the score, reinforcing what becomes a negative feedback cycle of repeating play. That's not to say that Bulletstorm is a bad game because of its scoring system. I think it's a game with a lot of fun novelty, even if it doesn't do its best at encouraging that and has aged pretty poorly. If it goes on sale, and you're interested, I'd even say give it a shot. It's just interesting to me how much a seemingly small system had me enjoy two spiritually similar games to completely different degrees. In the case of ULTRAKILL, it feels like a system that literally encourages maximizing opportunity, but practically intertwines with its rank to encourage mastery of its systems. Bulletstorm feels like a fun idea for a flash game fleshed out into a 5-hour experience. And while that's not all bad, the score for me is a prime example of the disconnect between what a system might be meant to do and what a mishandled application actually does.